Thanks to MPB for sponsoring this video. Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my first looks review of the OM system OM-3, a compact weather-sealed mirrorless camera based on the Micro Four Thirds system with a 20.4 megapixel stacked sensor. Announced in February 2025 and costing around £1,700 for the body alone, or £2,000 in a kit with the 12 to 45 f4 zoom, it slots between the OM-5 and OM-1 Mark II. In fact, price-wise, it's exactly in the middle, at least in the UK, costing £500 more than the OM-5 body and £500 less than the OM-1 Mark II. Prices do fluctuate though, so check my links for the latest deals, including US pricing. In terms of size and design, it's closer to the OM-5, albeit with a flat front, but inside you're essentially getting the OM-1 Mark II with the same sensor, processor and autofocus, not to mention the latest menu systems too. Phew! So you can think of it as delivering the quality and autofocus of the OM-1 Mark II, but in a smaller and more affordable body. Now there are of course other feature and handling differences that I'm going to mention throughout, but that's the essence of the OM-3. Long-term Olympus fans will also notice a resemblance to the classic flat-fronted OM-1 film SLR from the front, albeit swapping the self-timer crank for the creative dial from the Pen F. So I may as well address the elephant in the room right now. Many of us have been asking, begging even, for an updated Pen F and hoping it would be the next body from OM system. But clearly instead we have a new OM-styled body with some design nods to the Pen F, such as that flat front and the creative dial. I asked and I'm told the reason boils down to weather sealing, which apparently isn't possible on the Pen F body. So instead we have a sealed OM body with some Pen F styling. Now while the absence of weather sealing was indeed one of the major downsides to the original Pen F, I don't think I'm the only one who'd still be interested in an updated model with the latest sensor, autofocus and menus, even if you had to be a bit more careful in bad weather. After all, lest we forget, lack of sealing out of the box hasn't exactly held back Fujifilm's X100 series, and I feel OM system had the real possibility of pitching an interchangeable lens alternative to that model. Never say never, but I suspect that particular boat has now sailed. But the OM-3 remains a great looking camera, especially when paired with a silver lens like my old Olympus 17 1.8 here. Oh, by the way, OM system has also made new splash-proof Mark II versions of the 17 and 25 1.8 seen here, but they're just in plain black. I personally prefer the look of my original all-silver 17. How about you? And just for reference, I'm going to pop my own X100V next to the OM-3 for comparison. A little smaller in every dimension, but not a world apart in a bag or coat pocket, at least with this lens. Now if you are able to find the latest X100VI in stock anywhere, it has a similar price to OM-3, and while it does lack an interchangeable lens mount and full weather sealing, it does come with its own lens, a hybrid viewfinder and a larger and high resolution APS-C sensor. Or if you're looking for a compact full frame camera, how about Panasonic's Lumix S9 pictured here with the Sigma 45 2.8, and that's one of the smaller L-mount lenses available right now. It lacks the viewfinder and weather sealing of the OM-3, but packs a considerably larger full-frame sensor and at a lower price. But if you're committed to Micro Four Thirds, Panasonic's Lumix G9 II also costs roughly the same as an OM-3 while sporting a slightly higher resolution sensor, twin card slots, a better viewfinder and superior video capabilities. But they are very different looking cameras though, and I think that a decision between the two will be greatly influenced by that. At this point, it's worth reminding ourselves that one of the benefits of Micro Four Thirds is the wealth of really nice lenses available, with some great options on the used market. And when shopping for used camera gear, I always check MPB first, as unlike many auctions or private sales, they're very clear on the condition of a product, what it comes with, and crucially provide a 6-month warranty. So here are some of my favourite lenses for the system. First, the lovely Olympus 17mm 1.8, a fast and compact prime lens available in black or silver, the latter a perfect match for the OM-3. Yours for £289 in like new condition. Oh, and I'm quoting pounds because I'm in the UK, but MPB also operates across Europe and the US. For a standard prime lens, I'm rather fond of the original Leica 25 1.4 at around £200 in excellent condition and delivering some really nice rendering. Fancy a mid-telephoto for portraits? I've always liked the Olympus 75 1.8, selling for around £400 in like new condition and providing excellent background separation. Or if you prefer a telephoto zoom, how about the Olympus 40 to 150 2.8, available from around £650 in good condition. I've been buying and selling used camera gear with MPB for many years, long before they supported my channel, and I've always appreciated their clear and honest listings, as well as the reassurance of that 6-month warranty. So when you're shopping for used gear or selling something that you don't need anymore, do check them out at mpb.com or using the links in the description. Right, back to the review. Let's take a closer look around the OM-3 body, starting at the front where the creative dial dominates the grip side. Inherited from the Pen F, it provides direct access to the art filters and a wealth of colour or monochrome adjustments, but it's not customizable to other functions. Now this proved quite controversial back in 2016 when the Pen F came out, but now we have other companies, most notably Fujifilm, offering dedicated dials to directly access their effects or profiles. Of course, it all boils down to personal preferences, but I personally like this dial, not just for its very tactile feel, but also the innovative user interface for adjusting the colour and monochrome profiles. You first select a particular setting with one of the top dials before fine-tuning it with the other, guided by a clear graphical representation. It's a cool interface. Turning to the top surface, the OM-3 is packed with physical controls which will delight those who, like me, enjoy flicking switches and turning satisfyingly clicky dials. On the upper left side is a dial dedicated to the 3 shooting modes: stills, movies and the S&Q mode, alongside a small but snappy power switch. To the right of the viewfinder head and flash hot shoe is a lockable exposure mode dial with the usual PASM positions, along with bulb and 5 custom modes. It's possible to dial in shutter speeds from 0.008 of a second to 60 seconds using the mechanical shutter, or up to 32,000th of a second with the electronic shutter. Meanwhile, the bulb timer lets you preset long exposures up to 30 minutes, or even up to 6 hours in the live composite mode. These work in the same way as previous OM and Olympus bodies and are a highlight for long exposure photographers. Alongside the mode dial are finger and thumb wheels, both perched atop the body, and the former with the shutter release in the middle. I personally found the half press on the shutter a little ill-defined at first, but it's something that you do get used to over time. But bonus points to the feel of all 4 dials on the top surface, which may be small but turn with very positive clicks. Again, personal preferences, but I think Olympus now OM system is one of the best for implementing decent tactile dials on a small body. Fujifilm, take note. Round the back to the right of the viewfinder, you'll spot a new control labelled CP for direct access to 6 of the non-bulb based computational photography modes, and that includes live ND and high-res shot. Now these are all still available from their own dedicated menu page, but the switch and button lets you access them more quickly. I'll be showing you the high-res mode in just a moment, but just as a reminder, here's the kind of effect that you can get using the live graduated neutral density filter. And here's another darkening that bright sky. They're digital simulations of course, and purists will still prefer optical NDs and grads, but these effects are still fun to use and can deliver some interesting and useful results. Moving on, annoyingly, there is no joystick on the rear of the camera, but you can use the buttons as a joypad to move the position of the AF area, or of course just tap the touchscreen. Speaking of which, the screen itself employs a 3-inch panel with 16 20K dots, mounted on a side hinge which lets you flip it out, twist it up, down, or forward to face you, as well as back on itself for protection. Meanwhile, the viewfinder employs a 2.36 million dot OLED with 0.68 times equivalent magnification, and you're looking at it now. This appears to be the same spec as the OM-5, giving the OM-1 Mark II an advantage in both size and detail. I realise there's still a lot of mirrorless cameras which use 2.36 million dot EVFs, but for me the size and resolution of the OM-3's viewfinder is one of its weaker specifications, especially as the similarly priced X100VI has a 3.69 million dot panel. But before I go, extra bonus points to OM system for letting you change the colour of the optional alignment grids. That's a nice considerate feature. Moving on, the ports are found behind 3 flaps on the left hand side. First a 3.5mm microphone and headphone jacks behind their own flaps, followed by Type D micro HDMI and USB-C ports. The USB-C can be used for power, charging, data transfer, tethered shooting, and also for using the OM-3 as a standard UVC UAC webcam, although it won't support external SSDs. Meanwhile, the HDMI can output 12-bit 4K RAW video to compatible recorders if desired. On the grip side, behind a door, is a single SD card slot. Again, I realise space is tight in a small body, and this is a differentiator for higher end models, but I'd still have liked dual slots squeezed in there if possible. To be fair though, most of its small rivals are no different. But while many small cameras rely on a correspondingly small battery, I'm pleased to report that the OM-3 is powered by the same BLX1 pack as the OM-1 Mark II, rather than the smaller BLS50 of the OM-5. That's very much appreciated, and again bonus points for a tripod thread that's in line with the optical axis, unlike the X100 series which is off-center. At this point I think it's worth noting the key differences between the OM-3 and the OM-1 Mark II, as they certainly share a lot in common. Most of the differences are physical, with the OM-1 sporting a chunkier body with a decent sized grip on the front versus virtually none at all on the OM-3. It's one of the most comfortable cameras that I've used. The OM-1 Mark II also sports twin SD card slots, faster mechanical bursts, a sync port and a larger and more detailed 5.76mm EVF, not to mention having an optional battery grip. I don't think there is one available for the OM-3. There's also control differences, such as the OM-1 Mark II having a joystick, albeit lacking the creative dial of the OM-3. Both are, however, weather sealed to the same degree, with OM System quoting IP53 for both, which means being protected from dust as well as water spray that's less than 60 degrees from vertical. OM System and Olympus before them are one of the few companies to actually quote an official IP rating, and I welcome this transparency rather than the usual more ambiguous mention that a product is just sealed against dust and moisture. Okay, now for the quality, and the TLDR version is that the OM-3 delivers essentially the same photo, video, autofocus and electronic burst speeds as the OM-1 Mark II. So while I'm limited in what I can show you from my early OM-3 sample, I can just point you towards any OM-1 Mark II images you can find, as they should be essentially the same. After all, the OM-3 shares the same 20.4 megapixel stacked BSI live MOS sensor with quad pixel AF, coupled with the same TruePic-X image processor. The sensor is stabilized within the body, with OM System claiming 5.5 to 6.5 stops for unstabilized lenses, or up to 7.5 for those which support Sync-IS. Now, I rarely achieve anywhere near the quoted maximum from any IBIS systems, but personally find OM Systems to be one of the more effective on the market, and that's one of the benefits of having a smaller sensor to shift. Here's some examples of the slowest shutters that I could handhold using unstabilized lenses. The maximum image size with a single frame is 5184 by 3888 pixels in the 4:3 shape. Coincidentally, similar in vertical resolution to 3:2 shape sensors which have 24 megapixels, albeit narrower in width. As with earlier models, you can highly customize the resolution and the compression of JPEG files, but there's only one type of RAW file, and those typically measure about 18 meg each, and there's no HIF option either, at least that I could find. If you'd like more detail, there's two high-resolution modes that exploit sensor shifting to make a composite image, and that's performed in camera in just a few seconds. The tripod mode can generate up to 80 megapixels, while the handheld version delivers 50. The process can also help reduce noise and color artifacts, but obviously also has to deal with any subjects that are in motion during the capture. To compare the potential quality, I took a single frame with my OM-3 sample using the 12-45 Pro zoom at 25mm, and zooming in for a closer look, you're going to see similar real-life detail to other cameras in the 20 to 24 megapixel region. Now let's compare it to the high-res mode in the handheld version, where you can see visibly greater detail around static areas of the pier. Switching that for the tripod mode version looks a little better still. Now, like all pixel shift composite modes, there's varying success with any subjects that are in motion, here such as people moving around or even the surface of the sea. Some of these actually look quite natural, but others much less so. But in the static areas, there's an impressive boost in detail and overall crispness. I really like the look of these high-res modes, and I love the fact that they're also generated in camera in just a few seconds and in the choice of JPEG or RAW versions. They're perfect for archives, still life, or mostly static compositions. In terms of sensitivity, the OM-3 has a standard range of 200 to 25,600 ISO, extendable between 80 and 102,400 ISO. I'm going to run through them using an early sample of the OM-3, all JPEGs out of camera here, although again images from the OM-1 Mark II should be representative of what you can expect from the new model. As expected, for the sensor size, you'll want to stick to the lower values for the best quality, and it's worth mentioning that if your subject is static, you can exploit the excellent IBIS system to handhold quite slow shutter speeds, and those in turn allow you to mostly use lower ISOs. But if you need to freeze action in low light with fast shutter speeds and you demand the cleanest results at high ISOs, then you're going to be better served by a larger sensor. By this point though, I think the pros and cons of each format are well known, so if you're this far into this particular review, you know what you're going to be getting from Micro Four Thirds. Like earlier bodies, there's a wealth of bracketing options, including 3, 5 or 7 frame exposure bracketing, ISO bracketing, white balance bracketing, flash and art filter bracketing, as well as focus bracketing up to 999 frames with optional flash, and the chance to stack smaller sequences in camera with a handful of compatible lenses. There's also multiple exposures, albeit only for 2 frames, and the cunning live bulb, live time and live composite modes beloved of long exposure photographers. Now I've covered all of these modes in detail in previous Olympus reviews, so look back to those if you want to find out more. I'm also happy to report that OM-3 inherits the full subject tracking options of the OM-1 Mark II, which means there's separate modes for human, cars or bikes, planes or helicopters, trains, birds and animals, but no auto system which can pick the subject for you. Note the updated menu system from the OM-1 Mark II means that human as a subject is now found more sensibly on the same list as the other subject types. Here's the OM-3 in action, fitted with the Olympus 17 1.8, using human detection across the entire frame area and with continuous AFC. In this example, it momentarily loses me as I turn away or am at the furthest distance in the garden, but quickly reacquires my torso or face when they're large enough. In my own tests, I'd rank Sony and especially Canon as being better at staying locked onto a human subject when they're smaller on the frame or when they're turned away, and those systems also offer the chance to register and prioritize specific faces. But in general portrait or street use, the OM-3 didn't hold me back, and I also liked that you could assign subject selection to a spare button, then push it down while turning the rear dial to cycle between multiple detected targets. How about more action-packed scenarios? The OM-3 offers fairly modest mechanical bursts up to 6 frames per second, but inherits the much quicker electronic bursts from the OM-1 Mark II, up to 50 frames with continuous AF, or up to 120 frames per second with fixed focus, and slower bursts are also selectable if you prefer. There are, however, caveats, with 50 frames per second and AF only supported on a handful of pro lenses from OM System or Olympus, which frustratingly excludes even the new Mark II version of their 100-400 zoom. For those non-pro lenses, the top speed with autofocus reduces to 25 frames per second, and according to the specs, the potentially more accurate cross-type AF isn't supported in any of the SH2 electronic bursts. The other big question is how practical is the electronic shutter anyway when it comes to skewing? So here's a mechanical burst at 6 frames per second, taken while panning the camera and using a 17mm focal length, and I've tried to match the coverage, the subject distance and the panning speed with my recent reviews of other bodies for comparison. And next for the electronic shutter mode at 50 frames per second, where the pan looks much slower as there's so many more frames being captured, but the important part is the bottle and whether it's leaning to one side. Comparing frames, the mechanical shutter on the left and the electronic on the right, I'd say the latter is exhibiting a little skewing, but the stacked sensor is doing a pretty good job at keeping it minimized. It's certainly much better than most cameras that I've tested which don't have stacked sensors, such as Fujifilm's X100 series. To find out how well it works in a real-life scenario, I headed to the seafront with the new 100-400 Mark II zoom. Now, limited loan stock meant that I didn't have the big zoom at the same time as the OM-3 body, but I did have a final production OM-1 Mark II to try out on. And since both cameras should share the same photo quality, electronic bursts and autofocus modes, it should be a fair substitute, at least for now. So you're looking at a series of bursts taken with the OM-1 Mark II and 100-400 Mark II zoom, using the silent electronic shutter. As mentioned, this was shooting at a top speed of 25 frames per second with continuous AF, and I selected bird as the subject type and allowed the camera to evaluate the entire sensor area. In terms of recognizing the birds, the combination did a fair job once they were sufficiently large on the frame. I'd say roughly similar to Sony's AF system, but both brands falling behind Canon's latest models, which can identify smaller subject sizes with greater confidence. I certainly appreciated the compact size of the body in this lens though, giving the effective 200 to 800 reach, although of course the aperture meant that I was never going to achieve that much background blur in this particular scenario. I've got some more photos taken from my early OM-3 sample during my verdict, which you'll see in just a moment. But for now, moving on to video, the OM-3 inherits much the same options and capabilities as the OM-1 Mark II, so you can film uncropped 1080, 4K or Cinema 4K video in 24 to 60p with a choice of compression options. Note that there's no higher resolutions than 4K, nor any open gate modes either, and those are the ones which record the full height of the sensor. If you want either of those, look to the Panasonic Lumix G9 Mark II or the G8-7. Also note that selecting H.265 may unlock 10-bit video, but appears to subsequently record everything in OM-log 400, so if you prefer non-log footage, you'll need to shoot with H.264 in 8-bit. Also, All-I is only available for 1080 video and limited to 24 to 30p, at least as far as I could see. Meanwhile, the S&Q mode lets you unlock faster frame rates for 1080 video up to 240p, so that's going to give you a 10 times slowdown when played back at 24p. Although do note that all footage from 100 to 240p incurs a mild crop. Here's some example clips filmed with my OM-3 sample fitted with the 12 to 45 Pro zoom at 25mm, starting in 1080 at 25p, and next at 50p, which remains uncropped horizontally and sharing the same detail. Next for 4K at 25p where there's a boost in detail, with the coverage remaining uncropped. And now finally 4K at 50p, again uncropped and again with the same degree of detail as 4K 25. Now back to 1080 25 before having a look at the S&Q slow motion modes, first in 100p, playing about 4 times slower than normal on my 25p timeline, and you're also going to notice a crop in the field of view. And next in 200p, which represents an 8 times slowdown here, again sharing the same crop as at 100. And I'd say the degree of detail is similar to the normal 1080 modes. Okay, now for some video autofocus tests, starting with a simple focus pull using a central AF area, here with the 12 to 45 zoom at 17f4. Not a particularly tough challenge, but it's looking fine nonetheless. So let's now switch it to an older and brighter lens, my original Olympus 17-1.8, wide open. There's a shallower depth of field, but the focus pull is still performed smoothly and without wobbles. How about a mostly human subject, again with the old 17-1.8 and with the OM-3 set to face detection across the whole frame. Now I'm using quite a flat profile here, but there's punchier or indeed flatter log options if you prefer. Now there are some minor pauses as the AF system on this old lens catches up with me, but I'd still be happy using it for mostly static pieces to camera. Also note that newer lenses can be more responsive. And finally, hold on to your lunches as it's time for a rolling shutter test, starting in 1080 25p, where the stacked sensor is keeping any skewing to a minimum. Likewise in 1080 50p here, where there's very little skewing to mention. Next for 4K 25p, where again the sensor remains pretty well behaved, minimizing skewing from rolling shutter, despite the pretty vigorous shaking back and forth. And finally, likewise at 4K 50p, proving that the OM-3 is performing well in this regard. Now there may be a little bit of skewing in extreme cases, but in general use it shouldn't be an issue. Certainly on par with other stacked sensors that I've tested in this particular way. Which finally brings me to my verdict so far based on my time with this early OM-3 sample, and I'm going to be showing you some more images that I took with it using the 12 to 45 Pro zoom. The OM system OM-3 packs the photo and video quality of the high-end OM-1 Mark II into a smaller, simpler and more affordable mid-range body. It may not be the modern Pen F that many of us had hoped for, but it does include design nods to this much-loved model with the flat front and creative dial, while sporting the full weather ceiling that was sorely lacking from that camera. Fans could and no doubt will argue whether a small weather-sealed OM-style body is preferable to a non-sealed pen body, but there's no denying that this is a great-looking camera nonetheless that ticks all the right nostalgia boxes. Sure, there's not much for your front fingers to grip onto, but the plethora of satisfyingly clicky dials and switches are a masterclass in tactile ergonomics on a small body. I also feel OM system has been pretty sensible about what to include and what to miss out versus the higher-end OM-1 Mark II. Now you already know that OM-3 shares the same stacked sensor, image processor, autofocus, electronic bursts, and thankfully the latest menu system too. And impressively, for the more compact body, it even adopts the bigger OM-1 Mark II battery pack. Thanks for that. As for what's missing, the OM-3 lacks the twin card slots, the nicer viewfinder, joystick, sync port, and faster mechanical bursts of the OM-1 Mark II, not to mention its optional battery grip. Are these worth spending an extra 500 quid at retail? That's really up to you, and of course, which body shape you prefer, as they are quite different. Speaking of price, there's also a wealth of alternatives available, including Panasonic's arguably better featured, albeit also heftier G9 Mark II, as well as multiple APS-C and budget full framers to weigh up. As such, I'd have personally been happier if the OM-3 were priced lower, but I've felt that about most OM and Olympus products over the years. If you've got this far, you understand the pros of this brand and system, from the great build quality and superb IBIS to the raft of shooting options and cunning computational modes. Bottom line, I really enjoyed using the OM-3 and the results that it delivered. And that's all I can say for now. I hope to spend more time with the final production model in the future, but in the meantime, if you are interested in deeper dives into the photo and video quality, just look out for OM-1 Mark II reviews as a preview, as it should be identical in most image and video quality aspects. As always, if you found this useful, you can help me out with a like and a follow. It's just 2 clicks and very much appreciated. And a big thanks to MPB for sponsoring this video. If you have any used camera gear to buy, sell or trade, check them out at mpb.com or using the links in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.